Hi guys, Dr. Rachel Hippolyte here. So I've just finished my morning's brain training with NeurOptimal Neurofeedback. So I thought this is a perfect time to actually talk to you about the shifts that you may, and you would have heard me talk about these shifts and probably not quite understood what they were. So we'll go into a little bit more detail about those shifts. So what a shift is, it's a change in your brain, which will then be perceived as a change in maybe how you feel, your behavior, anything. So it's what happens is as your brain is given the new information from the machine and it starts reorganizing itself as it's adapting and changing, okay? Now, every brain is different, so we cannot perceive what those shifts are going to be with you. We can't perceive how long those shifts will take, and we can't perceive how, so we generally don't treat symptoms. We optimize your brain function and we allow your brain to optimize itself. So we cannot guess, we just know that every treatment that you have is going to be beneficial to that reorganization process. Okay, so examples that are of shifts would be perhaps that you feel calmer, perhaps you're less reactive, perhaps you're less angry, perhaps you're sleeping better, perhaps you feel more resilient to stress. So there can be so many shifts, and generally when we start treatment we write down what that individual actually wants from these outcomes, and then we keep an eye on the changes that they'd like to make. Now the chances are there's going to be other changes as well, which they weren't even particularly aware of, and part of my job is to get them to recognize those changes. The thing is, not all shifts may be perceived as positive, okay? And now this is a perfect example with me, okay? But it's really important to understand that you may have days where you've got these neurological shifts, and you may feel a bit grumpier, or you may feel a bit more irritable, which is exactly what happened to me. But those shifts are showing that the brain is changing, okay? And that's exactly what we want. And it may have to peel that onion to release certain things in order to get to its optimum, okay? So it's really important to understand that sometimes that what we may perceive as a negative shift is actually a positive, in the fact that it's that next step towards getting to the optimum goal. Okay, so let's talk about me and my shifts. But in order to understand those shifts, I'm going to give you a little bit more of an example of my brain, okay? My brain can be very hyper focused. I've suffered from mental health, both anxiety and depression, probably most of my life, but I had a huge issue in my early 20s. I'm coming up for 50 this year now. I've done a huge amount of work on myself and on my brain and on self-development, so I feel that I'm in a pretty stable state. Now, back in my 20s, I was put on antidepressants, and antidepressants, what they do is they literally stop you feeling. That's their job. It's allow you to take a step back, and at that time, those antidepressants were perfect. But I've never really, after coming off them, ever had that full feeling, that full emotion back. Now, my brain, based on traumas that have perhaps happened, and remember, traumas are very individual to us, my brain has learnt that emotions aren't necessarily good to express. Anger's not good to express, it's a sign of weakness. Emotions, so sadness, and I can literally remember fearing sadness, fearing going back to where I was in my 20s, and my brain protected me. It built up this wall to protect me from feeling. So I was very disconnected with my feeling, and we see this a lot in disassociation. We see this a lot in depersonalization. People become so fearful of feeling, and remember, emotions are normal. but they become so fearful of them that the brain protects them by then disassociating them, disconnecting them, in the severest case really disconnecting from themselves, from others. Okay, so now you have a little bit of a better understanding about my brain. And I've been doing this training. I'm probably on around 30 treatments now. And honestly, I thought I was good. I was stable. I was strong. I was not emotional. But holding in emotions, we know, is what the body does and is actually very traumatic. That's what the body does with PTSD. That's what the body does when emotions will then cause us physical harm later on in life. And if emotions aren't listened to, they will keep shouting louder and louder and louder, which is often where these mental health problems come from. So my brain has built up these brick walls of protection. I'm very strong, which in relationships isn't necessarily good. I don't need anyone. Again, in relationships, it isn't necessarily good. But the big thing is, I struggle to fully feel. Okay, now that can be everything from touch to emotion to everything. And I just accepted that this was me. I didn't know that there was any way that I could actually change it. And so around, I would say, treatment maybe 10 or 11, I was just sitting having a treatment and I just burst into tears. I never ever cry. I don't know how to cry. I can't cry. I sometimes put on a sad movie purely to see if I can get that feeling. So that protection, that crying is weak, is what my unconscious mind perceives, even though I don't see that consciously in other people. And even though I explain that emotions are important. So I knew all of this, but subconsciously, my brain was holding on to that protection. And so I started crying, and then there'd be days when I felt really irritable and angry. Now I knew that these emotional connections were important as my brain learned to optimize, and I needed to go through them. And so I was very logical about it. I accepted that this is just where I needed to be to take those next steps to getting my brain really, really healthy. So my biggest thing is I can suddenly feel again. But when you reconnect with feelings, you're not necessarily reconnecting only with those lovely, happy love feelings. You will also have to learn how to connect with those irritable feelings. Now, you know, I teach patients that you need to recognize those feelings. Don't fear them, but just look at maybe where they're coming from, what you need to do, and then process them rather than just putting them away. And that's what my brain is exactly doing now. It's peeling away all that hidden emotion that I have literally just pushed down all of those years. And my brain suddenly felt because it was given the right information from the neurofeedback machine, my brain suddenly felt that it was safe to feel. I'd always felt unsafe to be able to show emotion, whether that be anger, whether that be sadness, whether that be anxiety. And that's exactly what then did happen. I suppressed it down, but then it would come out in the form of constant worrying or not being able to sleep. And so I've seen that through, and it was about a week where I just felt really irritable, and I just sat with it. I continued doing my neurofeedback sessions, and I really feel like I'm coming out the other side now, and I've got a lot healthier relationship with those feelings. And there's no fear there. I just accept that that is what I'm feeling in that moment, and it needs to be felt. So that's the shifts that I'm talking about. I will continue to share my outcomes and my clients' outcomes. It's been nothing short of miraculous. I very rarely use that word, but something that I honestly didn't think I could change and didn't necessarily feel like I had to change, but I can now see it as such a major improvement to be able to release that built up trauma that has happened to most of us throughout our lives. Hope that makes sense, guys. See you soon.